that's a good one. Yeah, that's the type I used to use. It's not on now. Oh, oh, it needs another battery, Bob. There's only got one battery in it.
Haven't seen you in a while. Still hear your name from time to time.
Yeah, yeah. But is there an extra mic they can hand back and forth there? This is it. Okay, no problem.
Be like the Phil Donahue show. To talk to people like us.
I'm the Phil and Phil Donahue. That's right. So what's going to happen is there's only one mic. So I'll get a few and then we'll just tell me who's the next one. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Here's the problem. All the cameras are on the back. They get the angle. Not good. Almost makes me want to convert the days into a yarmulke, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, theoretically,
Everybody in place?
if you really wanted to, you could advocate like we need to worry about it. Well, what happened was the owners voted to have an alternate for everybody. So that happened at the last AGM. So that was actually voted on by the municipalities as owners, and they all said that they wanted to have an alternate. So we don't really have a choice. Like the owners have already said yes, you should have an alternate, but we can just not appoint one.
Kevin Lorette.
Right?
No, I've never met him.
Oh, okay. Then it's Kevin.
Who's the sing?
She's doing the, yeah. So, alrighty. Everybody's in their magical places. Call to order the special meeting of council for Monday, March the 23rd at marginally past 6 p.m. Purpose of our meeting this evening is to hear from our CRD administration as to what's in the works there. So with us this evening, we have the chair, Nils Jensen, our CAO, Bob Lapham, Diana Lokins of Finance, Larissa Hutchings from a combination of a bunch of things, Ted, also from CRD, Kevin, and Sina. So thank you very much, folks, and I'll leave it with you to get underway.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I want to start by saying how grateful I am to have the opportunity to speak with you and talk a little bit about the CRD. This is by way of orientation. It's also by way of introduction to the senior staff. We'll do that in a minute because they're your senior staff in the sense that, you know, in the CRD, we're kind of a collective of communities. And I know certainly from my experience in Oak Bay when I was a councillor, I'd often get constituents come up to me and say, what about this thing on the CRD? What's the wrong with this or what's right with that? And I didn't know who to call. and to get the answer. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to go out to the community, so you know you can put a face to the name, and so you're going to have a sense of if you get a constituent that has an issue, you can follow up. You can either obviously follow up through your own staff to CRD, or you can follow up directly. So in the materials that you have, I don't know if you have hard copies, there should be a yellow sheet, sometimes it's yellow, and with all their names, emails, phone numbers, and they're here to, oh, it is yellow, yes. They're here, the staff are here to introduce themselves in a minute and tell you a little bit about what they do. And so now, break down that barrier. If you need to call them, give them a call if you have some questions about the CRD. So it's a little bit about orientations, introduction, but also a little bit about celebration, about the achievements that you and as being part of the CRD have achieved, and finally some of the issues, a couple of the challenges we'll talk about, which are no secrets, and then the RSS, the Regional Sustainability Strategy. There's Bay. Sina will, I call her Tina, but Sina, sorry, will talk to you about. And then also at the very end, Diana will give you CRD finances on one page. It can be done. And give you again a sense of the size of the budget, the complexity of the budget. And there is a few themes here as I go through, and one of them is this is a big organization covering a big territory. And here is give you a real sense of the size. You can see Juan de Fuca electoral area is that green one on the side is almost as big as the rest of us. But it just shows you the diversity and the spectrum of services that these senior staff have to provide and the CRD have to provide. You go right from the very rural up near Mike Hicks's area up in Port Renfrew. You also have the rural Metchosin, the urban area downtown, and the islands, everyone with their own kind of distinct qualities and distinct characteristics. And that comes into play when you're trying to draft an RSS, a regional sustainability strategy, trying to balance all of those interests, the interests of Metchosin with Langford, with Colwood, with Oak Bay, and then right up to the peninsula. And you can also see how complex it is in terms of members, municipalities, electoral areas, and First Nations. And Diana will later tell you that there's over 200 services that are provided to this region by the CRD. Some of them to the whole region, some to the sub-region, some to the 13 communities, some specially to the electoral areas, and right down, I think, to a local water supply, I think where there's about 16 customers. That's the breadth of the job that the CRD looks after. But there's a very telling statistic here, which is, of course, very important when you come to discuss and talk a little bit about the RSS, and that is the population. Right now, we're about 371, and in between now and 2041, there's going to be 100,000 people joining us from somewhere. Probably all from the Maritimes, given their winter, but if they have another few of those, there might be 200,000 people joining us. But that's something that has to be planned for, and we're going to plan for that. Each one of us here in the 13 municipalities has to plan for it, but we have to plan for it in terms of water, sewage, all of the infrastructure, all of the services, as I said, over 200 that the CRD provides. And the RSS will take us to 2038. You'll hear Sina talk about Shift 38. And that, and she'll tell you what that stands for. And that will, it signifies the vision of the RSS is out to 2038. And there'll be nearly an extra 100,000 people. Where are we going to put them? We're going to have transportation for them. So, First Nations are also spread over a wide area, right out to the islands, right up to Port Renfrew. again, a diversity that we have to take into account, and we certainly have that as a priority, and working with the First Nations, bringing them into the governance structure, and we have a small task force that's been set up to do that thing, that very thing. That's led by Councillor Marianne Alto, and we have a couple of mayors on that too. So, again, speaks to the diversity of it. But really, the strength is in our people. We have 1,100 workers, but you can look at the number of volunteers we have, over 1,600 volunteers. And I know my home municipality of Oak Bay, no doubt, is very similar to yours in the sense that, you know, we wouldn't be what we are today without those volunteers. And it's the same thing for the CRD. And they're all led by these folks. Now, if there'd be two microphones, I would be speaking in one and they would be speaking the other, but I'm going to pass the microphone to each one of them in turn. They've been introduced to you. And what I'm going to ask them to do is just talk a little bit about their portfolio and what their responsibilities are. I'm going to specifically ask Larissa and Ted to talk about how their departments came to be. Because one of the other themes here tonight is I want to impress upon is how innovative the CRD has been over the years, and always looking for efficiencies. There was at one time that Ted's current department was split into two, and that created silos, and it created inefficiencies. So in 2010, they were joined together, and Ted's going to talk a little bit about that and how that is assisted. And Larissa joined, she had environmental services, and then parks came in at an opportune time. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone. Was it supposed to do? Who said Phil Donahue style? Is that what you wanted me to do? Now, who do we have over here? Oh no, sorry, that's Phil Donahue. Where are you from?
Good evening. My name is Bob Lapham. I'm the CEO for the CRD, and the executive leadership team is here with me tonight in Sina, and introduce them as we go through this a little bit. You're familiar with the role of a CEO in a local government context, and in addition to that, my role is a little different because we have two other corporations at the CRD, a housing corporation, which is a wholly owned corporation of the CRD, as well as a hospital district, which is another corporate entity where we provide capital funding and other partnership work with the health authority. In terms of a larger organization, we have quite a complex governance structure. You're probably familiar with the way the board members come to be on the board. But in addition to that, we have a large number of commissions. There's about 60 commissions in the CRD, and they're made up of volunteers and appointees that are spread all around the region, and they have a variety of delegated authority. Some with a large amount of authority, like the Water Commission, that has full authority over operations and capital priority setting, and others that are more advisory. You'd be familiar with advisory planning commissions or advisory emergency commissions and others. There's about 660 commissioners involved overall, and so it's a complex process where recommendations come up through our standing committees and up to the board, and the board relies on that structure to do the day-to-day business, and they also grant us a lot of delegated authority to manage operations with 200 services. So with this team, we're able to ensure a good alignment between board priorities, our corporate policies, and our strategic objectives, and then make sure that makes its way down into the various services, and that we stay on track and on budget, and ensure that there's a good alignment across the region as a whole. So that's my role. I'm going to pass the mic over to Dinah Loken, who's our CFO, and we work closely together in terms of the budgeting and service establishment process. So, Dinah.
Thanks, Bob. And good evening. In addition to being the CFO for the CRD and the hospital district, I have the finance department, which is very similar to the activities that your finance department does. And I'm also responsible for information technology, the spatial data, arts grants, real estate and property. I always forget one, so I have my little list here. And grants administration and risk and insurance. So we do have a lot of grants in the organization, and so that does become a benefit to all the departments that the administration through here, and a little bit of odds and sods. So that's my group, and I'll now turn it over to Larissa, and she can talk about her great green initiatives.
Thanks, Diana, and thanks for having us here tonight. My name's Larissa Hutchison. I'm the General Manager of Parks and Environmental Services. So on the park side, that includes regional parks. It's headquartered out on Atkins Road. There's going to be a few slides about regional parks coming up, just to give you a few facts and figures about that. Also included in there are 2 sub-regional rec centers, so Sea Park out in Souk, as well as Panorama Rec Center up on the peninsula. And as well, we administer a whole suite of community parks. So each of the electoral areas has parks and rec services and a whole number of community parks out in the electoral areas. On the environmental services side, I'm responsible for solid waste management planning, waste diversion, the Heartland landfill, as well as liquid waste management planning. I'm working very closely with your staff, Michael Baxter and Sandra Russell, on the West Side Select Committee and moving towards solution sets. And I think, Nils, you're going to be speaking a little bit about that later in the presentation. Also responsible for a whole suite of environmental programs, a source control program where we regulate discharges to sewer, stormwater program, cross-connection control, demand management, as well as environmental education. So I think Chair was talking about just how the department came to be. Our former General Manager, Lloyd Rushton of Parks and Community Services, retired, and we folded the 2 departments together, thinking we really needed a little bit more management horsepower out at Mill Hill with our regional parks, and so we were able to, I think, provide that management position where it was most needed in the organization. Just pass you along to Ted Robbins, General Manager of Integrated Water Services.
Thank you, Larissa, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ted Robbins, the General Manager for Integrated Water Services. So our department's primarily responsible for the operation, maintenance, infrastructure engineering, and capital project delivery for the CRD's water and wastewater utilities. So that includes regional utilities like the Regional Water Supply Service, which most of you are familiar with, as well as sub-regional services such as the Juan de Fuca Water Distribution Service, which provides retail water to your community, as well as the Sandwich Peninsula Water and Wastewater Services, where we have 3 municipalities coming together to provide service on the peninsula, and the Core Area Wastewater Service, which again you're familiar with, providing wastewater service for the 7 municipalities. In addition to those regional and sub-regional services, our department operates and maintains 18 small water and wastewater services. Nils mentioned one of them out in Port Renfrew. Those services run from Port Renfrew all the way through to the Southern Gulf Islands. The smallest service that the Chair mentioned on Salt Spring Island has 16 customers, so quite a wide range in terms of the scope and nature of our services, all the way from 16 customers up to over 350,000 for the regional water supply service, and a very distributed operation. We have operation centers in 4 of our locations across the region to provide and operate all those services. In addition to those utilities, to support those services, our department is also responsible for maintaining and operating the regional water supply service. That includes the Souk Lake water supply area, as well as the future water supply area in the Leach. And the Chair will be speaking to that in a moment. As you know, the Chair was quite involved in the regional water supply service for many years and remains quite passionate about that, so you'll hear more about that. And our department also is responsible for maintenance management for different areas across the organization, as well as providing the central fleet service for the organization. Our department works closely with the Reeses department in terms of our marine monitoring for our wastewater facilities, as well as the Reeses department's covering off all the water quality monitoring for our drinking water systems across the region. As the Chair mentioned, back in 2010, Integrated Water Services was created. Prior to 2010, there were 2 departments that operated quite separately in terms of engineering and operations. The wastewater side operated quite independently from the Water Services Engineering and Operations Group, and to resolve the inefficiencies that resulted from the 2 departments working independently, the Integrated Department was formed, and now we have engineers and operators and tradespeople that work on both the water and wastewater systems, so a much more efficient way of delivering the services. And now I'll pass you to Kevin Lorette.
Good evening, Your Worship and Councillors. I'm the newest member to the executive leadership team. I've been with the regional district now for just coming up on a year. Prior to this, I was up island with the Comox Valley Regional District. I'm the general manager of the Planning and Protective Services Department. It's quite a diverse portfolio. It includes the local area planning for the Juan de Fuca, the building inspection services for the 3 electoral areas, also the regional and strategic planning department, of which Sina Bay is the senior manager of that department. And in that, we're covering off our regional information systems, the work on the regional growth strategy, and now the current work that we're doing on the sustainability strategy. The regional transportation planning work that we did, the bike counts and the origin destination study that leads into our traffic modeling program. And then also within that area, we have the strategic planning work that the board undertakes at the beginning of its term of office, and we're just going to be hosting our second session this Friday, workshop with the board on that. I also have the emergency management and the protective services division, and that one includes the 911, hazmat, the 11 electoral area fire departments, and then we also have the bylaw and animal care. Bob touched on the Capital Regional Housing Corporation. We're the largest nonprofit provider of housing in the region, and that falls within my area. We also have the Capital Regional Hospital District, and that's where we're doing our large capital projects with VIHA. We're doing our bylaws for public health. So we have our idling, our clean air, our tattoo, and our tanning bylaws there. And then we also have the Housing Secretariat, and that's the Secretariat for the Coalition. We administer the Regional Housing Trust Fund under that area. I understand our senior manager, Henry Kampoff, will be providing a presentation to the council here in the near future on the benefits of the Housing Secretariat and the Regional Housing Trust Fund program. And then finally, last year we were identified as the community entity for the homelessness partnering strategy, and dealing with providing funding for homelessness projects. And we also do work with our member municipalities, looking at policy on affordable housing with our data book, gap analysis that's looking at affordability pinch points across the housing continuum. And that work is actually going to lead into our regional housing affordability strategy that we'll be updating later this year. So with that, I'll pass it back to Chair.
I know we haven't left out Sina. She'll be up. She has the segment at the end, near the end anyways, about the RSS. And I'm now going to walk through some of these services that you've just heard about and say give you a few facts and figures on them. And some of these are very significant achievements for us together at the CRD. And you can just see the extent of the regional infrastructure, which I'm going to talk about, all the right-of-ways and the parcels of land that are owned and the hectares of land. And, of course, this part of the Lochside and Galloping Goose is an example of not only a wonderful recreational area and environmental step forward, but it's a huge economic driver. People come from far and wide to use our biking infrastructure. I ran into someone last week, I happened to be in Seattle, who sang the praises of the Galloping Goose. He'd been up here many's a time, and they come up specifically for that. So this is an investment in our future and our economic future, and it's a wonderful green investment. We invest in buildings and infrastructure, bridges and docks and dams, and you can see some of the Capital Regional Housing Corporation complexes and buildings. And this one here is an affordable seniors residence at Carey Place. We have piping, 750 kilometers of piping. If you wanted to, you can lay the men down and get all the way to Golden. I'm not sure I'd want to. This is what Kevin was talking about, the emergency management. You go back when I started as a counselor 18 years ago, and if there's a hazmat issue, you had to call up to Vancouver and wait for the next ferry for them to come over and help. Now we have this coordinated unit. But you can just see, again, it goes back to what I said earlier about the number of volunteers and the work and the complexity of it right throughout the regional government. This is a housing system. There's three photographs here which show the progression, and perhaps unfortunate, but it's the way it is. Progression of how we have developed housing in the region. There was at one time on the right-hand side when the federal government actually helped build and fund the affordable housing. That is no more. There was a time, that was in the 80s and the 90s, when you had BC government getting involved and assisting. And now, in 2012, in this particular Saanich development, this is now all about partnerships and levering. And that's why Oak Bay, we joined the Regional Housing Trust Fund because we heard probably what you're going to hear a couple of years back about how every dollar that Oak Bay gave, it could be levered by partnerships anywhere from 7 to 12 times. And it was just a phenomenal way to raise money. And give you another example. I was recently out in Souk. One of my first duties as chair to open the Hope House out in Souk. That was a partnership, multi-partnership. Macola House, St. Vincent de Paul, the provincial government, the federal government, and a very large portion from the CRD. That place could not have been built without that kind of partnership. So we're in a very different world, and that's why the Regional Housing Trust Fund is so significant, and it's such an important way to move forward. You can see how many units, and now I'm going to ask Bob just to talk about a little innovation that we recently, that Bob kind of and his leadership team put together in order to get more affordable housing under our control and ownership without a tax impact. Can you imagine that? Bob's going to tell you how that was done.
So during the 80s, when some of the housing was built, the CMHC portfolios that were there, the Community Mortgage and Housing Corporation, had the lands transferred to the CRD. But during the 90s, BC Housing held the lands under the Provincial Rental Housing Commission through BC Housing, and they've decided to devolve that portfolio, and we hold leases on those properties. And so we're able to take the opportunity through that devolution to acquire the lands for 22 of those parcels with the encumbrances acknowledged. So that gave us a discounted value around $10 million with an appraised value of around $36 million. And we're able to essentially acquire that by offsetting the tax requisition costs to carry that financing from the Cap Regional Hospital District by doing a reduction in the requisition in that area to keep the cost neutral to the taxpayer. So looking at our different leveraging points with our different capital and operating funding, we're able to find the money through a reallocation of resources with those offsetting requisitions. So that's how we can now, with the amount of capacity we have or the number of programs we have, find efficiencies or different ways to take advantage of those opportunities.
Again, an example of efficiency and innovation in the CRD. The next slide is one of my favorites. This is all about water. I was fortunate to be the chair of the Water Supply Commission for 12 years, and during that time, the commission, working very closely with staff, just achieved incredible goals. We raised the reservoir, gave us 80% more water holding capacity. We brought forward water conservation programs. That means that for give you an example, when I first became chair, we were looking at a new water supply required for 2022-23. Now, with the water conservation ethic taking hold, we're looking at 2050, maybe 2060 if it continues this way. In fact, there's been about a 10% increase in population with how much? What was the decrease in water consumption? So the population is going up, the per person consumption is going down. So I think, again, it speaks to the innovative and educative programs that we have, not only in the schools, but right throughout our community. The top right-hand insert there is a photo from the inside of the ultraviolet plant. And when it was built, and it again was built with a partnership, a third provincial, a third federal, a third local. That was the largest UV plant in North America at the time. Now, that only lasted a few weeks as Seattle and Edmonton and others came on board with a similar technology. But again, we were very leading edge at that time, and something that certainly we can all be very proud of. This is actually where we draw our water. It's at Souk Lake Reservoir. It's about 7 kilometers or so long. You can't see the other end. And a couple of kilometers tops width. This is a fairly narrow area. And this is the intake. This is at the south end. The intake's been there since 1915 when it was first opened. In fact, this May is the 100th anniversary of this particular reservoir. And people at that time had the vision, the way out vision there that 100 years ago, the Greater Victoria area wasn't very big. But they had the ability to foresee the need for water. And we would not have been able to develop and grow the way we have without this. But that kind of vision continued. In 2007, we were able to acquire future generations' water supply. So if you look at the insert map, the green area, that's the Souk Reservoir area, which then that, the blue part is the lake that I was talking about. That's where we draw our water now. To the left of that, the yellow area, is the Leach watershed, Leach River watershed, and we acquired that in 2007 for a long-term capacity we were building there. So it wasn't just till the next election or the election after that. This was creating that generations from now water supply. And again, a great achievement. I know I've gone to, when I was chair, I went to a number of conferences, and we were the envy to a large extent of most water systems because we owned our watershed. 97% of the Souk we own. We had state-of-the-art ultraviolet. We're going to be spending upwards nearly $10 million on upgrading our chlorine and ammonia plants. We have renewed virtually all of the infrastructure that was built in 1910, 1915. So we don't have an infrastructure deficit when it comes to wholesale water. So it's something that, again, careful planning has led to. I know some people say, oh, we're paying too much for water. But if we don't pay this much for water, you're looking at the deteriorating systems and what happened in Walkerton, which wasn't pleasant. So it's something we can all be proud of. Our parks, again, 6 million visits a year. That's 1.5 visits for every person who lives in British Columbia. And look at 2,600 walks, hikes, workshops. It really shows how connected our community is to our park system and how important. And these, much like I talked earlier about the Goose and the Loch side, this is an investment in our economy because people, again, come from far and wide to use these parks. I mean, they're absolutely wonderful. And that's a schematic of where our parks are located. I'm going to come back and talk about something that's on the horizon that, again, an incredible achievement. Of course, we look after the regional wastewater management, and this just shows the core area and some of the Saanich Peninsula, and we have plants throughout the region. Solid waste. This is something comes under Larissa. Again, very leading edge. This is the Heartland landfill, and we've been able, through an incredible array of recycling programs, to divert 50% approximately of all waste into recycling programs. And why that's important is we don't know where the next landfill is necessarily going to go, but we do know it's going to be controversial. So the more we can stretch this and add life to this, the better it is. But while we're doing that, we're also being very green. We're capturing gas and turning it into electricity. 1,600 homes worth of electricity. Again, it's very leading edge. There's others that do it throughout Canada, but this is one of the certainly one of the leading edge captures of gas, and with the new treatment project, there's an envisaged to capture even more gas for even more electricity. This solid waste engagement, if you haven't already visited, you should go to myrecyclopedia.ca. You can virtually anything you own and think about throwing out, before you throw it out, go to that website. It's a very useful website. Generates a lot of hits. We even have 55,000 hotline inquiries about, what do I do with this thing? I have a battery. Where do I throw them? I have an old TV. What do I do with it? What about a mattress? Bring it up to the Heartland. Take it apart. Wood goes there. Metal goes there. And so these recycling programs have been just phenomenal. There's very little that needs to be thrown out. Recently, about a year ago, we started a program to encourage people not to put their junk on the boulevard. It costs us all thousands of dollars, all of the communities, to pick it up and put it and bring it up to Heartland. But we are encouraging, particularly students. It was that time of the year, the end of school year, where a lot of students go, okay, what do I do with this? Oh, I find that convenient boulevard. Most of it felt like it was in Oak Bay because UVic was there, but it's the same in all of the other schools and colleges and stuff, right? They're not the only ones. I mean, you see fridges on the side of the road, but there is a way to recycle all of that stuff. Now, another achievement, this to the picture to the right is it's an interpretive center, if you will, or an education center up at the Heartland. If you haven't already been up there in September, round up your kids or your grandkids and take them up there. It's a fascinating tour that they have. They get to see the kind of falcons that chase away the birds. They go into this house, which itself is recycled. This house was brought from somewhere else, and it's used as an education center for kids, and school kids come up there. And one wall, it's a little difficult to see here, one wall is kind of a section. If you were to make a slice of the Heartland landfill, it shows you where all these decades of materials have built up and how we're dealing with them and how they're decomposing. An incredible educational opportunity for kids. We also monitor and test over 35,000 tests for the safety of your water. 300 different parameters are tested for, and we do streams and stormwater discharges. Again, this is all playing in the background. A lot of people don't know that this is happening, but it's essential for our water safety and, of course, the safety of our streams. We do community parks and resources and theaters. There's CRD looks after the Royal and the McPherson through sub-regional agreements. And of course, as I mentioned this before, this is going to be a crowning achievement over the next year or two. This is going to be the new Sea to Sea Regional Park Reserve. And it just is a reminder of how fortunate we are to live in this part of the world. And we're not sharing this with anyone in Eastern Canada right now, just in the event that there's an influx all of a sudden. But this will be a park, again, that'll draw many visitors and economic benefits to our community. It's phenomenal when you see it from this angle. So we have some challenges. I don't have to share too many with you because you know what they are. One of them, of course, is the core area wastewater treatment. This is a big challenge. And just to give you, there's a car up there. This gives you a size of the challenge. Your pipe is sitting up there, municipal pipe. It's about the size of a dinner plate. The ones in the region, as all of the stuff is collected from all of the 7 communities, that pipe can get as big as a smart car. Conveying that around town and moving it from point A to point B is expensive, disruptive if we have to build more. But that gives you a size of the enormity of our flushes. And right now they're going out in the Macaulay on the left and Outfall and the Clover Point on the right. Although even on the left, Macaulay, a lot of the sandage, 60% of what comes out of Macaulay is actually from Victoria and sandage. So, but up there on the top right hand is the pots of money that we've been offered to do this. There's 3 pots. First pot, $120 million for the plant itself from the federal government, $50 million for the conveyancing. That just means pipes and pumps. A green fund, and then the one on the right, $83 million is 3P Canada, and we've recently the core area group has asked 3P Canada for essentially an extension to March 2016, and we're hopeful they'll grant that. before we have to sign up for the 83 million. The bottom pot is from the provincial government. It's separated a little differently, but again, those are grants that certainly we want to do our very best not to lose. But it is complex. It's a lot of money, and it's very complex. There's a lot of moving parts, but we'll at some point wrestle the beast to the ground somehow. I'm confident of that. The other big challenge right now, and there are many that we can name, we just picked two, is the regional kitchen scrap processing. And we had started under the Environmental Committee, Services Committee, had started a program of outreach to build a facility in the proximity of the region. Right now, many of us are sending our kitchen scraps, which have been banned as of January the 1st. They're going to Richmond. Saanich sends theirs up to Fisher Road up in Cobble Hill. But the board has decided we would like something in proximity to CRD, so we look after our own. And though the issue is a little bit difficult to see, but if you have a hand copy there and you have good sight, which I don't, you can see some of the issues. Again, a lot of moving parts. We have to look at the issue of odor control and who owns it, and what about the end product, and what about the technology. All of those decisions have to be made. Very recently, 15 proponents came forward with proposals, and the idea is that we'll whittle those down to a handful and then have a request for a proposal, so actually a bidding process. And it's quite open, whatever technology is most effective. The location is most effective. Heartland is in the mix and doing a composting up there. Now, this is on hold because the core area wastewater group wants to look at the possibility of integrating the waste stream. So, but I think we'll get back to this probably in a number of months. But again, this is all about diverting. We could divert maybe another 5 to 10% from our landfill, and again, extending the life of that landfill. So these are just some of the challenges. Most of it's about the achievements, because there have been many, and that really shows how, in my view, how effective the CRD has been over the years and the leadership it's provided. And we certainly are grateful to your worship and your alternate worship. Well, he wouldn't be an alternate director, I guess it's called, for the work that you're putting in at the regional level. And I know some of you are newer, and over time you'll start contributing. I know Gordy is not new, and he's contributing regionally in his own way with Crest. I worked, I don't know, how many years was I in Crest? 6 years, 2 terms, I think?
Yeah,
something like that. Again, it shows regional cooperation is possible along a whole broad spectrum, and the things that we can achieve with regional cooperation. So, this is the slide where I end, and I'm just going to say a few words.
I just want to break in for a second, because we do have only about 10 minutes
Perfect. Because
to finish this up
right
and
now.
Q&A and whatever, because our regular meeting starts for 7 and we need just a bit of a break in between. So
I typically stay right to the bitter end, but I have counsel, so I've got to get back there and
There
be the
you
mayor
go.
of that council. But Sina's going to talk a little bit about the RSS. Those of you who've been around for a while may recall we really grappled with the regional growth strategy. That those principles continue into the RSS, and then there's some new principles there. So if you have any questions for me, this is the time. I'll take them. But I would prefer you to wait and ask the really difficult ones of Bob, who'll stay here. And I should also say Ted, I think Ted has some kind of sporting thing where he's not going out to play. He's going out to help organize, and he has to go too. So both of us have to leave. And let me just say how grateful I am to, again, reiterate for the time here. But if there is any questions right now, anyone has for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
is there anything
Other than that,
directed
I'll
to Chair?
scoot out and I'll get to my meeting just in time.
Yeah.
I guess two quick questions. The first is, you talked about the water, and the water conservation line going this way, and then what I hear from the constituents is it seems unfair that I've started to limit my use. I'm not watering my lawns. I'm not doing all this stuff, and my costs are increasing. Do we have any sort of strategy on how we're going to balance version of consumption versus cost so that it doesn't seem like we're penalizing people for conserving?
The way certainly Oak Bay works, you can control, because it's all volumetric, with some very small exceptions, you can control your water consumption, thereby control the costs. It is a little bit difficult to explain, and you're right. As we conserve more water, we're not selling as much. There are fixed costs that then have to be spread out differently the next year. What most people don't see in part of this equation is what would happen if we hadn't done that. And let me tell you, when I first came on as the head of the water department, by the way, I was the second chair. The first chair was His Worship John Bergbush. He was the inaugural guy, and he put it all together and did an incredible job. But one of the things that we had an estimate of that time, and that would have been in 99 I took over, to have a plant. You might have remembered the Leach watershed, which is our next water source. Very likely that water will, when we start using it, will have to be filtered. Filtering is very expensive. So the estimate that I had in 1999 was filtering the Leach River would be approximately $200 million. The quicker, the more we can put off that, the bigger savings we'll have. So we are paying. There's a bit of pain in the short run. It's to avoid the large pain in the long run. And so we would have had, as I said, to spend $200 million just about now, because that's about a 5-year program. And that was in probably mid-90s that estimate was done. I don't know, Ted, has that been upgraded ever? So that was a 20-year-old estimate. I can't imagine what it would be now, but there's also very high operating costs. So yes, there is that phenomena, but there used to be the old TV commercial: you can pay me now or you can pay me later. You can pay a little bit more now to avoid the big pay later. So most people go, no, I want to save right now. No, we have to look at the long run. So thanks for that question.
Good.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And we'll see some of you at the CRD.
Thanks,
I'm
Nils.
going to now make my exit, and I have to go do some work. It's other work. Other half. Really appreciate it.
So we are getting down in time, so I hope he's left you enough.
I will give you the speedy version of my my presentation then. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to continue our collaboration on the RSS. I say continue because we have been working with Ian at a staff-to-staff level, as we have been working with the staff at other municipalities as well, to get the document to where it is today. As the board chair alluded to, we are building on the foundations of the regional growth strategy. So this regional sustainability strategy, although it's called something different than our previous version, it's still very much a growth strategy. It just happens to also cover expanded content area, including climate action, community health and well-being, emergency management, energy systems, and food systems. And I note that in a similar way, your own OCP has touched some of those expanded coverage areas, I think in recognition of the fact that those are in fact issues in this community as well as other parts of the region. As we move forward, some of what we're discussing at a staff level as well as with municipalities is what is it that makes something a regional issue? Because it's really those issues that we want to elevate into the regional sustainability strategy. So your official community plan covers content similar in nature to what is included in the regional sustainability strategy, but it includes discussion of those issues as relating to local matters. And the regional sustainability strategy deals with them on a regional level. And what makes those two documents talk to each other is the regional context statement, which is included in your OCPs, and which you draft and then send to the board for approval. So the regional sustainability strategy as is drafted right now includes ideas about how we can work together as a region to take action on those items that have been identified as regional issues. So the process we're going through right now is trying to identify what indeed are those issues and how do we want to collaborate on them, and to what level of effort does that collaboration happen. So that's where we're at right now. We're going through the process of engaging with community stakeholders as well as staff and councils to try and figure out what that content will be. There's not yet 100% agreement on what's to go into the RSS, which is not a surprise at this stage of the process. That's to be expected, but the rest of the process will get those sorted out. I do note that the document continues to evolve in response to input, and at the end of the day, the document can't be adopted by the board without each municipality signing off on it, so you do have quite a bit of control. As we move forward, just talk briefly here about the 6 objectives that are contained in the regional growth strategy or the regional sustainability strategy. Talk briefly about each one. The first objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, really in recognition of the fact that the board has directed us to have climate action be the lens through which we undertake this review. So we have got a fair bit of content relating to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we've also talked about how we as a community can be more resilient in the face of climate change, recognizing that we're already starting to see some of the impacts of climate change and will continue to do so in the coming years. We haven't forgotten the roots of what this document is all about, which is also growth management. I will highlight the fact that the document does deal with growth types of issues and land use issues at a level that is regional in nature, really recognizing that the majority of land use issues are really decided at a local level. So the regional plan talks about those items that have regional significance, because we know that there are certain types of land use decisions that made locally can still have an impact on the region as a whole, and those are the types of issues we try to identify in the regional growth strategy. Also talk about fostering well-being. We know that community well-being is more than building hospitals. It's also about clean air, it's about fresh water, it's about good jobs, it's about access to walkable communities, and we touch on those for that reason. Also talk about the natural environment, strategies to protect the regional park space, water quality, and the natural resource base. And then finally, the 6th objective is optimizing infrastructure, recognizing that clean water is essential to our well-being, and that's obviously a service that the CRD provides, as we just heard. The document also talks about extensions of sewer service, recognizing that that has an impact on regional growth patterns and distributions, as does the extension of water services. So the document also includes policy related to that. Finally, those 6 objectives tie together to deliver on the regional vision, which, as the board chair alluded to earlier on, is Shift 2038. That shift is, in essence, a moniker, an abbreviated form of the full vision, which is spelled out in the draft document. SHIFT stands for Sustainable, Healthy, Innovative, Fair, and Thriving, which are the component parts of our vision statement. So just briefly talk about where we're at in the process right now. As I talked about earlier on, we're in the process now of getting input, and we will be reporting out on the input that we've received since January, which was the start of our active engagement phase with stakeholders and the public. We'll be reporting to that on that to the board at the end of April, and at that time seeking their direction as to how they wish staff to finalize the document with the aim of bringing forward a draft bylaw. At this point, we're aiming to do that by June. So that's where we're at. We welcome your input either today, your questions today, or alternatively to be presented through your staff. I understand that you have that planned in the coming weeks, so we welcome your input at that time if that's more convenient for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll try and be really quick. What's being handed out right now is what we call CRD on a page. On the left-hand side of the page are the services that the CRD provides. Across the top of the page is a column for each municipality and electoral area. and Colwood's column is highlighted with blue so you could follow it down through the program. For every service that Colwood participates in, that line is greened. So the dollars that are filling the squares there are the requisition dollars, because they were what we're already producing. So when you look at your column, and I'll just do the first one, legislative and general government, your $158,000 is part of that $4.9 million that is collected, and you can see across the top how the other municipalities are paying into that relative to you. That's the way you read the whole document, and we have it into subcategories. The first group of categories, direct. The board has more direct involvement in the delivery of those services. The next group, mandated, that's where the liquid waste management plan, solid waste management plan, those kinds of things are. Then we go down to contracted and emergency. And lastly, on the municipal side, delegated responsibilities. So that's really the water distribution system there. And at the very bottom, you'll see your own debt as the MFA debt, and you'll see your share of the hospital district. So in one page, you can see the services that you're in and not, and you can see where you fit compared to the other jurisdictions. And that's a short story.
Good. A moment or two for questions if there's anyone at the table that would like to ask a question of any of the members left from the CRD staff.
I have one final question.
Yep, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. First of all, this is really cheating by saying this is one page. I'd just like to say that. But I do have a question about the dump, and I don't understand the CRD, the Heartland dump, but also, but it's a question I get all the time from the public. And when the kitchen scrap program